name's Todd Miranda, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate how to paint with video in a WPF application. So let's begin in Microsoft Visual Studio 2008. We'll choose File, New Project. Let's choose a WPF application targeting .NET Framework 3.5, and let's name it appropriately. Alright, so this will create our default template for a WPF application. And let's begin. I'm going to increase the size of my window just a little bit, just to give us a little bit more space to work with. Okay, so let's begin in our grid, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can work with video in a way that's a little bit different than just displaying the video on the page using a media element. So since we're working with video, let's add a video to our project. So let's choose Project, Add Existing Item. We're going to go to our Public folder, Public Videos, and we'll use a sample video. And we'll choose the butterfly video. And one of the first things you want to do when we add this video to our project is click on the video, and in the copy to output directory property, let's go ahead and just make that copy always. What that's going to allow us to do is make sure that the video is always going to be in our output directory, and that way we can use a relative path to get to it inside our media element. Okay, so let's begin by adding a border to our grid. And the border is going to have, say, a width of 100, a height of 100. We'll just make it square. And we're going to add a border thickness and a border brush so that we can see, so that clearly outlines the border. And the other thing we're going to do is let's do a vertical alignment equals top, horizontal alignment equals left. Okay, so now we have a border, and if you've done any work with video, you know that, well, inside our border we could add a media element with a source of butterfly.wmv. And let's go ahead and run that. Let's just take a look at what we have with a video inside the border. So we'll run that. Builds, displays a window, and there's our butterfly inside our border. Notice the white edges around here, and that's because the video by default is going to stretch uniformly. It's not going to stretch out to fill the entire space. Now we could make it do that by setting a fill, the stretch to fill here in a media element, but we're really not after that. This is a media element that's inside the border itself. But there's a different way to, well, and by doing this, we could interact with this video because we can interact with the media element. We can click on that, we can do things to it. Let's say that we just want the visual aspect of the video, but we don't necessarily want the interactive element of the media element. We're still going to have a media element because that's how we play video in WPF, but let's say that we want to turn this video into a paintbrush so that we could paint things or use it as a brush. Well, it's actually pretty simple to do. Let's include a border.background, and if we do this, we can include a solid color brush and set that to blue. Oops, color equals blue, and let's just play that. So what we've done is we've set the background property to a solid color brush, a blue color, so we're painting the background with a solid color brush of color blue. Well, let's get a little more fancy. Let's use, instead of a solid color brush, let's use what's called a visual brush. Now, the visual brush has a property called a visual. Whoops. .visual, and this is where we would put whatever elements whatever things we wanted to use as the visual that will then make up the brush that we're going to paint with. So let's just move our media element into the visual property of the visual brush. So we're going to paint the background with what's called this visual brush. We're going to set the visual brush's visual to this media element, and let's see what happens. Alright, so you notice a couple things. First of all, the video is filling the entire area, and the reason why is we're painting with the video. So if you say you were using that solid color brush, you wouldn't want to only color part of the background. So using a visual brush, we're actually painting the background with the video, and the video is still live, which is what's great. So that allows it, so effectively it's going to fill the space, and it's filling the space again because we're painting the entire background with that. So visual brush is a really terrific tool that we have to be able to paint with, because we can put any visual elements in the visual property of the visual brush. So we could do lots of stuff. We could put controls in here. We could do all kinds of really neat things. Let's take a look at a few of the other parts of the visual brush, which are kind of nice. First of all, when we paint with a visual brush and we're using this visual space, we can set the viewport area of where that brush is being painted. I know that may sound a little strange. So let's look at an actual example. So let's set the viewport, and in the viewport we're going to say what is the region of the thing that we're painting, whatever that thing is. What is the region of that we're actually going to allow the paint to display in? So this is going to start with a 0, 0. Effectively this is going to be the top left corner of our viewport, and then let's do 0.5, 0.5. So we're just going to say start at 0, 0 and go halfway along the x-axis and halfway along the y-axis of whatever the thing is that we're painting, and that's the viewport that I want you to use as the area that you're going to paint. So let's take a look at that. Since we started at the top left and we went down halfway along the x, halfway along the y, we would assume this top quadrant, and it is the top quadrant of our border, is now being painted with a video. And notice the video is still completely stretching to fill that square, but it's only painting what is in the viewport region. Alright? So now that we've set the viewport, what are some other interesting things we can do with that? Well, let's take a look at the tile mode. This is really neat, the tile mode of the visual brush. And notice that we've got tile, flip X, flip XY, and flip Y. Let's just start with tile. Now, this is probably going to do exactly what you would think it was going to do. We're going to tile the visual brush, specifying this viewport, and now we get 4 of those video areas because it's tiled that. We set the viewport area and then we just tiled it all the way across the control. Alright, let's take a look at one of the more interesting property values, flip X. So what this is going to do, now our viewport, remember, is the top left quadrant. If we're going to flip along the x-axis, that means we're going to tile along the y-axis and then flip along the x-axis. So let's take a look at that. Alright, so we've tiled along the y and then we've flipped along the x. You can see some pretty interesting things that you can do with that. Last, let's go to the flip XY, and now we're going to flip both in the x direction and in the y direction. So there's our window, and you can see the video's been flipped both in the x and the y direction. Pretty interesting kind of kaleidoscope effect. So imagine, depending on the video that you had, the really crazy, neat, interesting type of effects that you could create with that as your background on an element. So we've been using this border as the element that we were using to demonstrate this, but let's take it one little extra step. A border, okay, no big deal, because technically we could have just put the video inside that border, maybe done some transforms or something to kind of produce a similar effect. I'm going to leave my border there for now. We'll go back and remove it in just a second, but I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create a list box control. Let's set its width to be 100 and its height to be 150. And actually, let's do the same thing with it. So let's do a vertical alignment equals top, and a horizontal alignment equals left. And now let's create some list box items. So list box dot items, and I'm going to create a list box item, and this will be list item 1, and then I'm just going to copy that. So we got list item 2, list item 3, and list item 4. So let's just take a look at this, make sure that our list box shows up the way we want it to. It should actually sit on top of our border right now. Okay, so we can select our items in our list box. Alright, so we've seen list boxes before. Well, let's extend the whole idea of the visual brush. And I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come down to my list box, and I'm going to say list box dot background, and I'm going to paste it in here. So now I'm going to get rid of my border, and we'll just look at the list box. So let's run this and see what we get. So this is absolutely great. We have a list box that we can still interact with. We can select the items in our list box, but its background is a actual live running video, and we've done all these nice flipping effects with the video that allow us to create a really interesting looking application. Now, I don't necessarily think that you would want to create that particular video behind a list box like that. Now, there are some ways that you could do that with a list box that wouldn't be too distracting, but we don't want to go too crazy. But the idea is there that you can do some really interesting things with that. Well, the last thing that I want to mention is this. A lot of times you don't place the actual element directly in the visual property of the visual brush, because perhaps that element exists somewhere else on the page and you want to use it there. Well, you don't want to duplicate that same code in your visual, so you want to use an existing element somewhere else on the page as your visual brush. So let's do this. We're going to leave the vertical alignment top and horizontal alignment left, but we're going to add a margin, and we're going to just say that we're going to move this down, let's say 100, 100, 0, 0. So we're going to move it over and down 100 pixels. And then I'm going to go right up here, and I'm going to add, actually let's just copy my immediate element right up here, and it's going to have a vertical alignment of top, horizontal alignment of left, and its source will be butterfly.wmv. Now we're going to give it a name so that I can reference it, and we'll just call it my media. Now let's go down here to our visual brush, and let's add a property to our visual brush, visual equals, and now we're going to use a binding expression, element name equals my media. So now, instead of including the element directly within the visual brush, we have the element that exists somewhere else on the page, and we want to use that as our visual brush. So we're simply going to bind that element into the visual of our visual brush. And let's see how that works. So here's our video displaying in the background, and then we utilize that video as our visual brush for the background of our list box. Really interesting concept, using this visual brush and including as the element of the visual brush a video, and then being able to paint with that visual brush on whatever element you can paint on, whatever element you can set its background to, or any element that, or any property that takes a brush or a type of brush as its property value. Some really interesting things. Let your creativity run wild, and you can do some amazing things with a visual brush and painting with video.